TPCSI fans, you want to revolutionize your sports investing habits? Allow me to tell you about WagerWire. WagerWire is an app that helps you become a superior bettor by allowing you to sync all your sports books and track all your bets in one place. See your current action, your betting history, and stats. You could also sign up for sports books and collect bonus offers. Follow them at WagerWire on X, as it's the best account on the platform. Head to App Store or Play Store now and search WagerWire and download the app.
2,000 years long, we will never settle. Hard days, no way, with a heavy metal. No time, no fail, won't stop here. Like a torch to a flame when it burns hot. We won't stop, come on, baby, higher.
Good afternoon, sports fans from all around the globe. I am the host, Jeff Dawson, East Coast Sports Investors, and it is the closing bell on Thursday with good friend and colleague, Mr. Ron Marmalewski. Head on over to Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it, at Ron A Sports. Follow this man. He breaks down college and NFL like no other, and we're blessed and honored to have him here for his third season of action. And we got to thank everyone that steps into our area every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern to listen and watch. Shout out to our proud sponsor and partnerships. It's WagerWire. Head on over to Google Play or wherever you download the app. It is free. CT Bets, the team, the family, second to none. That is Viva Tequila Seltzer. The East Coast is cuckoo for their new flavor, coconut. Go try one. And Terry Smith, Atlanta Steak and Seafood. Head on over to Facebook, introduce yourself, then head on over to Atlanta Steaks and Seafood. Place an order. This week, the last week of Seafood Month, at the checkout window or use the promo Seafood20, get $20 off any box of seafood. That's lobster tails included. So without further ado, the star of this show, the one and only Mr. Ron Marmalewski.
Good to be back with you on a Thursday. Well, let's see. One major college upset already. A 6-0 team loses to an 0-6 team. I don't know. We have some what look on paper like lopsided matchups this weekend, but Jeff, by the time we get to Sunday, there'll probably be one or two results where we'll be shaking our head. So we'll see. Every week's an adventure.
It's Thursday. I've done shows all the way up to today. I talked about it with Paul Stone. I got to give you a few seconds, your thoughts. Welcome to the real SEC, I'd like to say, to Texas. They went into Alabama last year, 5-point underdogs, and beat the Crimson Tide. Undefeated, heading into last Saturday's main event, as we'd say. Line tipped as high as 5.5, closed to 5, 4.5. Great start by the Bulldogs. What I saw really was that defense that won them back-to-back championships. Thoughts on Georgia and Texas, what you saw on Saturday?
Yeah, it just seems like there's so many challenges in these super leagues right now. The Big 10, the Big 12, of course, is very even keeled, and the SEC. It's hard to get up and have your absolute best outing for each and every game. Georgia did not have a good outing against Alabama, and we saw what happened in the first half of that game, and it took a long time for them to come back, and it just wasn't enough. So we didn't get Georgia's best hand that week. we saw more of the true Georgia, maybe this matchup against Texas. Texas maybe didn't have his best game. Quinn Ewers was neutralized a little bit. It's just a fact of life. That's what we're going to be seeing week to week in some of these marquee matchups. It's going to be so hard to go undefeated with the schedules these teams face.
You know, I left 2 weeks ago that Oregon-Ohio State game. I talked to you last week about it, saying, well, I think on a neutral field or wherever they played again, I still thought Ohio State was the better team. And no disrespect to Oregon. Leaving this game here, I still think on a neutral field, I would lean Georgia. And I know we didn't see Texas's best effort.
Yeah, I think it would be really tight. I really think that the Ohio State-Oregon one, definitely I would have Ohio State a couple points higher than Oregon. In this one, I think it's pretty much flip a coin, that it would be a toss-up. I think Georgia can still play to that level, but Texas can play better. I'd probably be more in toss-up range on a neutral field for this one.
Alabama Crimson Tide, Coach DeBoer. We talk about the highs, we talk about the lows. Tough. I was so excited for that game at 3:30 on Saturday. I was probably expecting or hoping we were going to see that 50-47 who has the ball last from 2 years ago. The first half, I went outside and I was just, it was like a root canal without Novocaine. It was ugly football. Nico wasn't good. Jalen Milroe wasn't good. Both defenses played well, but at the end of the day, the Vols still have one loss. Alabama now 2 losses. We have a big following from Alabama. A lot of the people are waving the white flag. They're saying this team doesn't have it. Ron, what do you think?
Well, I was rooting for Tennessee, and my wager was on Tennessee in the game, but I expected more out of Alabama's quarterback Milroe, and we didn't quite get it. I don't know about the root canal reference, because root canals are tough enough with Novocaine as opposed to without Novocaine. But I like lower scoring games. Tennessee had shown me prior to the Alabama game that they could play defense. In fact, they're playing better defense than that high-powered offense is playing offense right now. We talked about it. Too lofty of an expectation for Tennessee's quarterback. But the defense pulled them through. There'll be better times for Alabama, maybe this year, definitely moving forward, because DeBoer has won big everywhere he's coached. Gets a little bit of a break this week because Missouri will probably be without their quarterback Cook, who suffered an injury. Missouri could be kind of a pest defensively as well, but maybe they're able to turn over Missouri. So they get to reset button. They're going to play Oklahoma down the road, Auburn down the road. These are flawed teams. They may only have one more fantastic test, and that's that LSU matchup. So it's not I think expectations went sky high after they beat Georgia, but maybe they should have been tempered to begin with, because you don't transition from Nick Saban. You shouldn't transition from Nick Saban and hit the ground running the way they did at the beginning of the year. This is just a reset.
There's a couple intriguing Friday night games, but I want to stay here for a second. I think the most intriguing game, other than LSU and A&M, we'll get to that in a minute. Navy undefeated, as well as Army undefeated, but Navy plays Notre Dame, neutral site at MetLife Field. A number that opened around 13, dipped to as low as 11.5, settling on 13. Strength of schedule, actual athletes on the Notre Dame side. I get all that, but this is a special Navy team. Can they keep it within the 13? I know the public's all in on Navy, not just holding on to the plus 13, 12, whatever they got. The money line. Everyone's rooting for Navy here. Do they got a chance, Ron?
They have a chance, certainly. My numbers would have suggested that this game be around 16. So I don't think they're getting full value in points, but I can understand why, because service academies tend to shorten games. They run the ball, they play keep away. Navy's playing better defense than we thought they would, at least that I thought they would. They're getting tremendous quarterback play. They're really all the way back after a couple of years dip. this is still a tough game for them because even with some key injuries for Notre Dame, if you look at their defensive numbers, even though Navy's not a passing team, they're probably going to have to pass every once in a while in this game because Notre Dame does a good job against the run. They generally do a really good job against one-dimensional teams. And then when you have to pass against Notre Dame, very rare in this day and age to see a Notre Dame defense or any defense in the NCAA allow 50% pass completions or even slightly lower than that. So from a defensive standpoint, at some point, I expect the Navy offense to crack just a little bit. The line's a little bit low, like I said. Fascinating game to watch, no action from me, but Navy's playing such disciplined football that anything's possible.
Tomorrow night I will be at the Heights in Boston College as they host Louisville. 7:30 kickoff there. A BC team that started off great, shocked the world, beating Florida State, beat Michigan State, wake-up call against Missouri. Stubbed their toe. Your Virginia Tech team that you talked about pre-flop here is rounding into form. Watched the game last Thursday, Paul, and it was 28-0 at halftime. I changed the station to the baseball game. All of a sudden, I see across the bottom at the end of 28-21. I go back to the game. BC turned it over, gave up 2 touchdowns. I never should have watched it. Thoughts on BC Louisville? Number has crept to as high as 7.5. I did see it touch 8. This Louisville team has got me a couple times this year. I've stayed away from them. Of course, they're rounded into form. What should I expect tomorrow night at the Heights?
I think it's a tale of 2 different styles in this particular game. In my opinion, for Louisville to win by margin, they're going to have to run on Boston College. And my numbers tell me that they can run on Boston College. There is favorable situations, historical with the data that suggests that Louisville will be able to run on Boston College. On the flip side, for Boston College to win this game, I think they have to pass on Louisville. I don't think they can win the line of scrimmage battle in the run game. So if you think the Boston College quarterback can more than hold his own and counter what Louisville will do in the run attack, then Boston College will be the right side in this game. I think the line is fair. I made it 6.5, maybe a soft 7. So we're right there in terms of the number. I don't think there's really any value. I slightly would lean to Louisville only because I do think they have some run game edges. So Boston College, I think if they get the passing game going, this will be a very competitive game, but that's where they have to go toe-to-toe with this Louisville team.
If you had on your bingo card Friday night must-watch TV at 10:30, Boise State at Allegiant Field in Las Vegas against UNLV, must-watch TV, a number that crept open around 3.5, a flat 3 right now at circa minus 15 cents. It is 3.5 at the Superbook and the South Point. Hello to Jimmy Vaccaro and Chris Andrews there, of course. Thoughts on Boise State UNLV?
So situational Friday change for me. My wife and I will be having a luxurious lunch at some winery in the area because dinner time is taken. This is the best game of the weekend. Really looking forward to this Boise UNLV game. Not a great schedule of defensive opponents that Boise faces. So UNLV is going to be the best run defense, and it's a little bit better than average considering level of competition for UNLV's run defense. But Boise hasn't faced much, and we know that Ashton Junty can run like crazy. If the season ended today, Boise's corrected for sacks and kneel downs 8.05 yards per carry would be the best in NCAA history since I've been tracking this since 1977 or 79 or something like that. You'll appreciate this. The 2 teams that tied for the best ever, one of Tom Osborne's Nebraska teams at 7.6 and Colin Kaepernick's Nevada team at 7.6. So 8.5 would be a record, 8.05. And so this is going to be an incredible battle, I think, here. And on UNLV's side, we know that their quarterback, their original starting quarterback who won the job, said, hey, you didn't pay me the $100,000. I'm leaving. I think he was about 47, 46% through the air. If you're going to beat Boise, you have to throw the ball. And the switch to this quarterback might be the medicine that they needed. UNLV, I probably have a slight lean to UNLV, but I'm not compromising anything and forcing a play. I'm only forcing myself to watch this game. This is going to be an intriguing chess match. I think UNLV can pass on Boise, so we might see a relatively high scoring game. What do we have on the over-under? We're looking at the mid 60s, I think. It makes some sense as long as UNLV can finish some of the drives. Fascinating game. With Liberty losing, that really ends Liberty's chances of going to the group of 5, being one of the 12 playoff teams. The winner of this game takes the lead in the group of 5 entry into the 12-team playoff.
Yeah, the opening under over was 66.5 down to 64.5 at the Circa. I mean, this is roll the ball out. I could see both teams getting at least to the low 30s. One of them might crack 35 to 37. So it's definitely must-watch TV there. This surprised me. 3:30 on Saturday, BYU at Central Florida. Super, super high on the Central Florida team. Pre-flop, one of the bigger letdowns of the year. Now it has come from BYU -2 to Central Florida 2.5-point favorites -15 cents. The Circus telling me they're getting ready to move that to 3 with a 54.5. Are you surprised with that number?
I'm surprised with the move because UCF has lost a few different games here and there in terms of their season. Very erratic when they are favored. BYU is undefeated. You'd think that they would get a little bit more public love. If the game did go to 3, I think that would be the resistance point and it would come back down. I think the line, my personal line was Pick'em. So I was closer to UCF than that opening line of BYU too. But I think books probably opened as BYU a slight favorite because they thought they'd get a little bit of BYU money. What's not to love about a 7-0 team? Is BYU a great team? Not necessarily, but UCF is flawed as well. I mean, I think this is a toss-up game. If UCF commits to the run, I think they could control clock and do some damage in the run game. But you can't discount how BYU has been able to fight back and win some of these games. And they're never out of it. They have that winning is contagious. And so that has helped BYU overcome. Remember, at the end of last year, they had a 4-game losing streak. Losing got contagious. They were losing games that they could have won, either that extra turnover they were committing or that stop that they weren't getting. Well, that's flipped because winning has been contagious to them. I wouldn't want any part of this game. I think, I might have a part of this game if the line went to 3, but I really think it should tick down because I think 3 would be the resistance point.
The marquee game of the night, 7:30 start. LSU travels to A&M. LSU opens up the year in USC and loses there. A&M hosts Notre Dame and loses. Both teams undefeated. Since then, a line that opened up at 3 with a 53.5, now down to 1.5, and that's the Aggies' favorite. With a total right now of 54.5. This LSU quarterback that no one's talking about is slowly but surely rounding into form. Winner here really solidifies them into that potential top 12 in the playoff. The loser, like Alabama, will be staring at 2 losses, Ron.
Yeah, and both teams started slow that first week. Competitive games, they didn't under schedule, that's for sure, with A&M playing Notre Dame right off the bat with a new coach and LSU playing USC. So they had the loss. Everybody forgot about them. And all of a sudden now with Georgia having a loss and with Texas now having a loss, Alabama a couple losses, Mississippi having a loss, overtime loss to LSU. So this has become the front and center game. The winner will put themselves in some tiebreaker situations, if not to get to the SEC title game, especially for A&M with the rest of their schedule, but still make that playoff. That's pretty good for both of these teams. I'm sure they individually had high expectations, but probably at the beginning of the year were considered more top 20 as opposed to top 12. Good test for LSU versus a Mike Elko coach defense and going to that 12th man stadium at A&M. So it's a really good test. The line opened a little high, I thought. I made this game pick 'em as well, even though I slightly favor A&M in the matchup analysis. So I thought it was a little bit of a tip-off that A&M was favored by as much as 3, but that wasn't, to me, that wasn't sustainable. If you really look at the quarterbacks and you look at what A&M's quarterback, he's a little bit interception prone. He could have had 5 interceptions last week. He got away with a couple of throws. LSU's quarterback, if he has a big game, LSU rides him to victory. This should be a close, competitive game. Slightest of edges based on my matchup analysis to A&M.
Transition to the NFL. Head on over to Twitter at Ron A Sports. Go follow Ron there if you haven't already. NFL, I mean, it's a laundry list of injuries. It just keeps getting worse. Last week, I don't get it. The Bucks down 10 minute to go, and there's Godwin out there, out for the year. Prior to that on Sunday, Ayuk now out for the year. DK Metcalf hurt. Debo was in the hospital, played 3 plays with pneumonia. He might play. Rod, how do you work your numbers and magic with these laundry lists of injuries?
That's why a lot of my power ratings are circled. I'm looking at my numbers now. Every team plays, so they're all in front of me. I think I have 5 teams with circled power ratings where you know the ballpark of where they are, but you can't really trust the number. I mean, these cluster wide receiver injuries. Remember what Philly was without Smith and without their other Brown, Smith and Brown, I think, AJ Brown. And now you had the versatility of Debo Samuel when he went out, and then you had Ayuk out. That effectively ended the San Francisco KC game because San Francisco, I think, could have been the better team in that game, but you knocked 2 of these guys out. So it's going to affect Tampa having their 2 wide receivers out. Baker Mayfield is going to have to find a lesser wide receiver to throw to where he hasn't established a bond with. I mean, you're talking about 2 Hall of Fame receivers in Evans and Godwin. I don't know about Godwin. Godwin would be in consideration. Evans is a surefire Hall of Famer. To be without those guys and injuries, whether we're talking about offensive line, whether we're talking about some of the cornerback injuries, wherever we're talking about it, 28 out of 32 teams are dealing with injuries now. And I just think you shake your head and you say, that's why you build through the draft. That's why you don't waste any draft choices. And that's why every position, every pick is important. That's why the teams trending at the bottom, the Jacksonvilles, the Carolinas, the so on and so forth. If you're not replenishing through the draft, when injuries hit and you use it as an excuse, you have nothing else to fall back on.
Well, and now let's look on the other side and your power rankings. And Tyreek Hill said it best. The band is back, and he used a profanity word or 2. All systems point to Tua being back. And I think last week I chastised the mad scientist or the genius over there, Mike Daniels, in regards to not even finding a way. I would have bowled the ball to Tyreek Hill or Waddle, tried to do something, and they were just nowhere to be found for a month. In comes Tua. Now all of a sudden, there'll be a little rust, obviously, but you get now those 2 weapons back in action with Waddle and Hill.
Yeah, I always think power ratings and when you add or subtract people are contingent on who you're playing at the time. So the fact that, for example, Tampa's playing Atlanta is good for Mayfield because he plays a passive defense. Same for Miami against Arizona. Arizona has enough defensive flaws, and now they get Tua back. The line, according to my power ratings, has adjusted and calling this, even a rusty Tua, as a 5-point change. In other words, I think Arizona would have been a 2-point favorite with Tua not in the game. And if my numbers are correct, I don't have it in front of me. Miami's about a 3-point favorite right now. That would be a 5-point swing in terms of what they think Tua is worth. And that makes some sense to me, that Tua is worth about 5 points right now in his first game back. If he finds a rhythm, if everything goes well, he's actually going to be worth more like 6 or 7 points, because he could throw Tyreek open and he could hit Waddle in stride. The other Miami quarterbacks could not do that.
Tonight. Well, actually, let me go. The rich get richer. We talked about it 6 weeks ago when I had Brady Tinker on. Brady told me that there was a plan in place. We saw Devontae Adams go to the Jets. We're hearing Cooper Kupp potentially on the trading block, of course. And then we see the Bills jump in and get Amari Cooper. D-Hop, during the free agency period, spent a lot of time in Kansas City, chose the Titans. Kind of an insurance policy, Brady Tinker told me, with Rashee Rice out for this year. Next year will be healthy around week 4, and then the NFL's going to come in and hit him with a 6-8 game suspension. Hopkins allows them this year and next year with his contract. Thoughts of Hopkins now going to Kansas City?
Embarrassment of riches, because they had already signed a wide receiver at the beginning of the year, and he's missing the year. So, and they could have the best wide receiver room in the league by the time 2025, middle of 2025 comes, if there's a suspension to Rice. It's crazy. My complaint is, I know Tennessee's starting to be in fire sale mode. They gave up on Ernest Jones after 6 games and 44 tackles already. But why are you doing this? Why are you sending these guys off for these lower level draft picks to Kansas City? Why are you doing it to help the rich get richer? Great move by Kansas City, obviously. Hopkins' value increases with a quarterback such as Mahomes. Hopkins kind of been doormat the last couple of years. So if you trade him to a team that doesn't have a Mahomes at quarterback, it's not as meaningful. But you've got even Smith-Schuster, a good route runner. Now you've got Hopkins on the other side. You've got Worthy, the speed guy, rookie. You've got 2 or 3 tight ends that you're very comfortable with. A good move for Kansas City, just like Amari Cooper was a good move for Buffalo, who was a little bit low on wide receivers because of their offseason moves, and Adams to New York. All these wide receivers are going to enhance the teams that they're now playing for.
I gave the gold star out Monday morning with Mr. Krakenberg to Mike Tomlin. And the reason I did this was this. No one in the NFL knows their room, their temperature, like Mike Tomlin. He says it like it is every day at the podium. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. 4-2, he pulls the plug. He brings in Russell Wilson. In come the Jets. Another new shiny toy, Devontae Adams. Play a little grab ass in the first half, and then Russell Wilson and the Pittsburgh D say, hold my beer, and just mop the floor with the Jets. And Pittsburgh now 5-2, tied for first in that division with the Ravens. Thoughts on what Mike did, and thoughts on the Steelers now with a healthy Jalen Warren and Najee Harris moving forward?
This has been a fantastic year, and the season win totals are doing great and whatever. So now's the time that I take something like a hammer and put it to my head 3 times and say, who am I to question Mike Tomlin? I mean, I'm the guy who played Pittsburgh early last week and then hedged off half the play because I had concerns about Russell Wilson. Should I trust me outside of the locker room, or should I trust Mike Tomlin to make the decision right? I think I'm going to stick with Mike on this one. So I get a demerit or two in terms of me not trusting what Mike knows. I have doubts about Russell Wilson, but Tomlin saw somebody who could stretch the field a little bit more, somebody who's willing to throw a little bit more downhill passes. You can't get the running game going unless you get the guys to back off the line of scrimmage. And the game plan with Russell Wilson allowed that. And then I got to tell you, with Pickens in the lineup, it's not a 50-50 ball when you throw to him. It's a 70-30 ball. And because Russell Wilson knows how to loft passes better than a lot of people, including Justin Fields, his style of play is still better in terms of getting that opportunity available for a guy like Pickens to go up and steal a catch. And Pickens is so capable of doing that. It's incredible. I think there'll be bad moments still for Russell Wilson, still worried about his internal clock and so on. But Mike Tomlin said, this is where we think we can improve. And he's right.
And you know, George Pickens was just like, hallelujah. And
I know,
and he was reborn. And you know, I don't believe everything I hear or read in social media. Of course, Cooper Kupp, quote unquote, on the trading block, and we're going to get to them next. The number one favorite right now is the Steelers. You know, a Cooper Kupp, George Pickens, left and right would be pretty intriguing there, of course, there. Tonight, very intriguing. Minnesota travels to face the Rams. And there's a thing going on social media. Teams that face the Lions are 0-4, and they're getting outscored by 1,000,000 points. The physicality that the Lions bring to the table is wearing on these teams. Now you're talking short week. And now, all of a sudden, miraculously, insert Cooper Kupp, and Puka Nacua is off the IR and going to be active today. Here's what I tell you. The line opened up at 3.5. I trust and respect opening numbers. There's only one way that number could go. And of course, this morning, everyone had 2s and 2.5s across the board. I reached out to Jeffrey Benson. I was like, are you surprised? I never thought you'd get off at 3. He goes, Jeff, we've been getting sharp play all week on the Rams. Is this the banana in the tailpipe? Or, I mean, it's a must win. Rams win this week. They play Seattle next week. They're in first place in the West. But it seems like they're all in today, Ron, in tonight's game versus the Vikings.
Yeah, the Rams win last week set them up into that quartile number 2, the second set of games, 5-4-4-4, because they had the convenient after week 5 bye. The Rams were going to be all in last week because their season was on the line. They win that. They come in. They know San Francisco. First of all, they have a win over San Francisco. So they have that leg up. Seattle's going to be up and down, new staff, young team. Arizona's going to be up and down. When they play their best, they're a pest to everybody, but they're not going to always play their best. The Rams, if they win this game, should be fully invested in this season and possibly stealing and winning the division. I want to debunk a little bit that Detroit Lion situation about teams that face the physical Detroit Lions. I know a lot of Lion fans won't like me for this, but the old Pittsburgh Steelers, after you played the Pittsburgh Steelers and you got beaten up by that blue-collar kind of team, that was a several-year situation where it was 7, 8, 9 years. If you just blindly bet against a team that played the Steelers, you were going to hit 62, 65, 67% all the time. A 4-game sample size isn't good enough for me with the Lions. I think what's more important with this is that Minnesota comes off a divisional loss, now has to go short week on the road versus a motivated Ram team. I think it's coincidental that they also played Detroit, but it's a conference game. And I put more weight in the fact that they wanted to beat Detroit and just couldn't get over the hump in that game, a very close, tough game. And now they have to reset themselves so fast. So I do think the sharp money is validated with the Rams in this particular case. But Minnesota, you know, could they steal a win? Yes, they could steal a win because we know Flores is going to put enormous pressure on the Rams offensive line. And if Stafford stays error-free, you know, we've got a Ram win. But if Stafford can be coerced into interceptions by Brian Flores' defense, then Minnesota can steal the win.
Before we get to the closure of this show, we got a few minutes left here. I want to open up the board to you and give you a few minutes maybe to break down a few games that you might see some edges or your numbers that just don't mesh with what Vegas is trying to sell us.
Okay, let me look through the board a little bit. First of all, and I said this just recently on the show that I do with Ted and with Chris, is that this is a relatively terrible slate to try to find a lot of games to play, in my opinion. My power ratings are close. You've got teams like Tennessee are selling, but they're playing Detroit, who's in complete letdown mode. You've got Tampa, who plays a passive Atlanta team, but without their two wide receivers. You've got Washington that may not have their quarterback. And we're trying to jockey for how much are all these differences worth. So I would argue that I downgraded Tampa 2.5 points, which is a lot for two wide receivers, but it's two Hall of Fame type wide receivers. And I think there was an overreaction. So if Atlanta goes to 3, it's kind of a weird number. Why wouldn't you like Tampa at 3? And I'm disappointed if we don't get Daniels against Chicago, because if we don't get Daniels against Chicago, because Caleb Williams is hitting on all cylinders right now. Chicago is a great test for Daniels because Chicago has rested a very good defense. I wanted to see what Washington could do. I wanted to see what Caleb Williams could do against a Washington defense. So I feel a little cheated on that. I think the intriguing games would be, to me, Philly and Cincinnati. I wouldn't trust either team as a favorite. Coincidentally, both teams have come off games against Cleveland and the Giants. So you could do a lot of comparison stakes in the last 2 weeks, and they still come up pretty even. Interestingly enough, Philly is better when they run the ball, and Cincinnati, for whatever reason, their offense isn't in rhythm right now. But one of these teams gets a very much needed win. Philly's trying to keep pace with Washington. Cincinnati wants to get back in the race, and every time Pittsburgh wins, it means that Cincy is playing for one less, they're dropping down one slot in the playoff picture. So, time is important for Cincinnati. And I don't know what we're going to get in the Dallas-San Francisco game. So it's a crazy board. I'd say the most true game we have on the board, Jeff, is Indianapolis and Houston. We don't have a lot of injuries to talk about. I don't know what the situation is with Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor would tip the scales, I think, to Indianapolis, being able to keep Houston at least honest defensively. Whereas I do think Houston and Stroud will have a rebound. Stroud didn't have a good game last week, 10 out of 21. I think Stroud has a better game, but Houston tends to play close games. Every one of Indianapolis games are close. Indianapolis cannot afford to go 0-2 against Houston at this stage in the season. A lot of intriguing matchups. I don't have any fantastic words of wisdom to say, play this, play that. It is not that kind of a week. I know my colleagues and friends are going to be teaser heavy. That pretty much leaves me out because I believe still that the definition of tease in the dictionary is one that I don't want to get involved in. It's a tease. So I'd rather earn my living with straight plays, and I do not see a lot of straight plays this week.
For Russell Saylor and the Indianapolis Colts fans, Jonathan Taylor, full practice today. Josh Downs, full practice today. And Michael Pittman also practiced. So that number did open up at 6.5. It is down now to 4.5 at the Circa, 5s across the board. There is a 5.5 at the Heritage. So money coming in on, it looks like, the healthy Indianapolis Colts run.
Makes some sense because it's a divisional game. It's a critical game. These teams play, they're not winning by margin. When they do win, they're winning close games. So, past history would say yes. Is Houston the better team? They're not only are they slightly the better team, they're clearly, in my opinion, the better coach team. Even though DeMeco Ryans is barely in his second year, he's pushed all the right buttons. They've done a much better job from a roster standpoint, and like I said, Houston's going to think Stroud's going to have a 70+% passing day. But you can't ignore the fact that this is probably going to be a very entertaining, close game. I would look forward to watching this game for sure.
Well, the scroll has been going the whole time. Everyone knows X, Twitter, at Rod A Sports. They can get a lot of your work at Wager Talk. But before we finish, I got that tight spiral, that 7-yard button hook for Ron's closing thoughts.
Well, let's pivot back to the NCAA because unfortunately, as we always see this time of year, because it's a win now environment in anything, we have coaching moves that happened last week. We had 2 coaches fired, 2 coordinators fired, and a meltdown by a head coach in another situation. I kind of want to touch on each of these in my closing thoughts because this win now league thing is just crazy. East Carolina fires their coach. They were on a winning trajectory for a little while, and then the last year and a half, their offense stopped producing. So they went ahead and fired their coach. Their defense is playing fairly good ball. They're undervalued this week against Temple for whatever that's worth. Interim coach bumps tend to happen in the NFL. I don't know if they do happen in the NCAA, but East Carolina is very disappointing this year, but it's a pretty good job in the athletic conference. If it stays intact, they still could be a player in that league. It's a good recruiting ground. It's a good job. A better job, believe it or not, is Southern Miss, who just fired their coach. And probably justifiably, they couldn't get anything going at Southern Miss, the school that once produced Brett Favre and Ray Guy, one of the greatest punter of all time, and quite an athlete too. He played some quarterback, defensive back, and so on. And Southern Miss actually had some really good coaches, probably before most people's times, but Google Jeff Bauer, I think is his name, was just a really good coach at Southern Miss. This is a really good job to have in a league that can be won. I think if they do the right thing, that's a cushy job in my opinion, and they underachieved. They can really get things going. Oklahoma fired their offensive coordinator. Writing was on the wall. Oklahoma's offense has slowed to a crawl this year. It's not going to be a great transition to the SEC. And teams like Oklahoma, they don't want to become the next Nebraska, who kind of wanted to move from the Big 12 to the Big 10, thought they'd be elite in the Big 10, and they have been anything but elite in the Big 10. We don't want, for old time's sake, Oklahoma or Nebraska to be afterthoughts in the NCAA circles. This will be a critical hire. Coastal Carolina, people don't realize this. They averaged 32 points per game this year. They're 4-3. Their offense wasn't the problem. They didn't just demote their offensive coordinator. They fired their offensive coordinator. The head coach will call plays for those that are keeping track of Jeff Beck's team. I think that's a curious move, and I don't like it. I don't like that kind of chemistry or lack of chemistry. Guys, they've averaged 32 points a game. If that's disappointing to them, it's not something that you fire a coach for and you say, congratulations, we appreciate all the work you've done, is the usual language that people did. And finally, Arizona State's head coach, fresh off a fantastic win last week, they lost. Coach had a tirade. Can anybody kick? Can anybody kick? We're accepting walk-ons. I don't remember how that went, but all the walk-on tryouts were yesterday. So I haven't Googled or found out whether or not they're replacing their kicker. Yes, kicking is a problem, but I have a problem with a coach having that kind of public tirade. I know Dillingham is young and he's new and he's finding his footing, but that's better left behind closed doors. So those are my, did you find out some interesting stuff if you follow the colleges? And every week we're going to have more college news because of this win now mentality. We had that period of time when coaches weren't fired because everybody was on eggshells because they didn't want people to transfer in the middle of the season. Now that all these kids have played 5 games, they're ineligible for transfer. A lot of moving parts in college football, but it'll be interesting to see how the interim coaches and coordinators do moving forward. my advice, keep track of all these strange happenings as they occur week to week.
Well, and it's going to be funny too because a lot of these coaches breathed a sigh of relief because they couldn't get into the Final Four. They knew there was going to be an Alabama or a Georgia, there was going to be an Ohio State or a Michigan. Does the SEC get two teams in and everyone's fighting for that one spot? So I think a lot of these teams on the cusp breathed that sigh of relief, saying, well, now we got 12 spots. The SEC can take a couple, the Big Ten can take a couple, the Power Five gets one, and everyone's fighting now for 5 or 7 spots. Well, wait till the season ends and they were outside looking in from a 12 spot, and now they're going to be scratching their head and saying, oh, I better get my resume ready, Ron.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Two things can be true at the same time. I think in general, and it was proven at the end of last year too, the SEC isn't really as good. I mean, they're really, really good, but they're not this elite thing. And there were other conferences that were just as good. The Pac-12 last year was clearly just as good as the SEC and the Big Ten as well. So that can be true. All at the same time, I still expect 4 bids from the SEC when all is said and done. And that's when some of the complaining will start.
Well, we can't wait for that as always. Ron, before we leave, tell them everyone where they can find your work, your podcast schedule, and your written work.
Yeah, written work has slowed down, but I think I'll write. I didn't promise it last week, but I think I will be writing a little bit more for Wager Talk for this upcoming week. Hopefully, something in the NCAA and NFL. I will rejoin Chris on Tuesday to brainstorm the NFL. Back with you next Thursday. Back with Chris and Ted to break down the Thursday game and the audio clips that Ted provides. So that's where you can find me. Little Sunday notes on the games usually for the NFL to kick it off. We're halfway through the season, and it's fascinating how the final chapter hasn't been written, Jeff. We have no idea how the stories are going to end for a lot of these teams. We don't know what the Final Four is going to look like in the NCAA or NFL, and that's the beauty of the sport.
1,000%. I mean, I got a mind thought about the AFC. I already know in my mind who's the best currently in the NFC, but again, we're only halfway through. We got 9 more weeks, and we know there's a lot more injuries coming. So, people, pump the brakes. We got a ways to go. So, for myself, Jeff Dawson at EC Sports Investor, the one and only Ron Marmolewski at Ron A Sports. Scotty Webb in the batter's box here at 6:15, talking World Series. We'll be back tomorrow at 11 a.m. with the NCAA Insiders, talking some college football with Matt Grissom. And at around, that's at 10:30, I'm sorry. And at 11:05, Adam Trigger back for week 2, talking some college basketball. We are 8 days away from the start of college. Can you believe it? Have a great